There is a moment when a legend is about to die or be born, where a whole hall stops breathing at once, and I have stood inside that moment with a blade in the room, and the most powerful wolf in the realm stripped of everything that was supposed to protect him, standing there as nothing but a man, because I was the one who had taught him how. The great hall was full, and the thing that had come for him had come precisely because the mask was finally down. For a lifetime, the Alpha King had been a god in a golden frame, untouchable, unreachable, a portrait no assassin dared aim at, and I had spent a season teaching him to be a person instead, to laugh, to be loved, to be real. And now a real man stood exposed, where a legend used to stand, and the old guardian who had built that legend looked at me across the hall with grief and fury both. Because his warning had come true. I had made the king reachable, and something had reached for him. I had 3 seconds, and a choice, and the whole question of whether a beloved man could survive where a feared portrait never could. And it all came down to whether the thing I had cracked open in him was his ruin, or the only thing that could save him. Let me go back to the portrait, and the dare, and the 3 seconds of joy that started all of it. I would spend them again. I want that on the record before I tell you what they cost. I had 3 seconds of pure joy laughing at that portrait. Then I heard someone clear his throat behind me. My name was Nessa, and I was an Omega, the lowest the packs keep, newly come to the palace of the Iron Reach to scrub its endless floors, and on my 3rd day there, I did the thing that changed my whole life, which was to laugh at a painting. You have to understand the portrait to understand the laugh. It hung in the Great Gallery, twice the height of a man, the official likeness of the Alpha King, and it was the most ridiculous object I have ever seen in my life. The king in it stood on a crag with a storm behind him and a wolf at his heel, and one hand on a sword, and the other raised, as though personally commanding the weather, his chin lifted at an angle no human neck achieves. His eyes fixed on a horizon full of his own destiny, every line of him screaming, "I am a god, you area worm." It was magnificent. It was also, to a girl who had grown up shoveling out goat pens, the single funniest thing in the entire capital, because I knew exactly what a man looks like when he is trying that hard to seem important, and it is never, ever important. It is a man who has been told to hold still and look like weather. The other floor girls dared me. That is the whole shameful truth. We were cleaning the gallery after dark, and they dared the new girl to do the king's pose. And I have never in my life been able to refuse a dare. It is a genuine flaw in my character. And so I climbed up on a bench in front of that enormous painting, and I did it. I lifted my chin to the impossible angle. I raised one hand to command the weather. I gazed nobly at a horizon full of destiny. And I said, in the deepest, most self-important voice I could dredge up, "Behold, I am the Alpha King, and I have never once in my life sat down, for I am far too busy being magnificent, and also, I believe, I can personally instruct this storm." The floor girls were dying. I was dying. For 3 glorious seconds, I was the funniest woman in the Iron Reach, up on that bench with my chin in the air, mocking the most powerful wolf in the world, to a room I was certain held no one but us. Then someone behind me cleared his throat. The floor girls vanished. I have never seen people move so fast. They were simply gone, the way smoke is gone, leaving me alone on my bench with my chin still absurdly lifted, and my hand still commanding the weather, and a cold dread going down my spine, because there is only one reason a room empties like that. I turned around. The Alpha King of the Iron Reach was standing 6 feet behind me. He was not in the Stormcrag pose. He was in plain, dark clothes, and he had clearly been passing through the gallery on some late errand, and he was looking up at me on my bench with an expression I could not read at all, and I understood in one cold plunge that I was going to die. I had mocked the king, impersonated him, called him a man too busy being magnificent to sit down, on a bench, in his own gallery, to his actual face. Omegas have been flogged for far less. I had 3 days of employment and about 4 seconds left of my life. I got down off the bench and onto my knees so fast I bruised them. My king, I am so sorry. It was a dare. I did not know you were. I did not think anyone. I will accept any punishment. I am so sorry. Is that meant to be me? I stopped. His voice was strange. I looked up. He was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at the portrait, up at the enormous, storm-lashed, weather-commanding god in the golden frame, and his face had done something complicated, and he said, again, quietly, the pose. Just now. Is that meant to be me, or the painting? The painting, my king, I whispered. I would never, I was mocking the painting, not good. He said it with a fervour that made no sense. Because you have got the painting exactly right, and I have wanted to say so for 11 years, and have not been permitted to. And the Alpha King of the Iron Reach looked up at his own official portrait, the untouchable God King likeness that hung in his great gallery, and he said, the chin is the worst of it. No neck does that. I have tried. I stood for that portrait for 3 weeks, and the painter kept lifting my chin, and I kept telling him it made me look like a man being hanged very slowly, and he told me that was majesty. He looked back at me, still frozen on my bruised knees, and the last thing I expected to see on the face of the most feared wolf in the realm was there, plain and astonishing. Envy. You climbed up on a bench and laughed at it. Do you have any idea how long it has been since anyone in this palace laughed at anything near me? Do it again. I did not do it again, because I was still fairly sure this was an elaborate prelude to my execution. But I was not punished. That was the first impossible thing. The Alpha King helped a floor girl up off her bruised knees, told her she had done nothing wrong and everything right, and walked out of the gallery, and the next morning I was not flogged, not dismissed, but summoned, and my strange new life began. And it took me a long time to understand the man at the centre of it. Because the man was buried under 11 years of a legend built to keep him alive. The king's name was Callum, and he was, the songs all agreed, a god. Remote, untouchable, magnificent, a wolf so far above ordinary life that the whole realm regarded him the way you regard the sun, real and vast, and not a thing you make small talk with. He did not attend feasts as a person. He appeared at them as an occasion. He did not speak, he pronounced. Everything about him, every portrait and ceremony and carefully staged remove, said the same thing the painting said. I am not a man. I am the Iron Throne itself, and you cannot touch me. And he was, I came to learn, the loneliest person I have ever met, because you cannot touch a god. And no one had touched Callum. Not with honesty, not with laughter, not with the ordinary warmth people give each other for free, since he was a boy of 12. He told me why, eventually, in pieces, the way the powerful tell the true things. His father had been a different kind of king. A reachable one, a warm one, a man who walked among his people and let them near him, and a man who had been murdered for it, knifed by an assassin who got close precisely because the king was the kind of man you could get close to. Callum had been 12, and the old guardian who raised him after, the Lord Steward Orwyn, had drawn exactly one lesson from that grave, and had built the boy's entire life around it. A reachable king dies. So he made Callum unreachable. He built the legend, the remove, the portraits, the God King who stood above all touch, not out of vanity, but out of terror, to keep the boy alive. A king no one can reach is a king no one can knife. Orwyn had spent 11 years turning a person into a portrait, and he had done it out of love, and it had worked, and it had also slowly killed the man inside the frame. I have not been laughed at since I was 12, Callum told me. I have not been argued with, or teased, or told I was being ridiculous, or treated as anything but the throne, in 11 years, because Orwyn taught the whole realm that to treat me as a man is to endanger me, and they believed him, and they were probably right. And then a floor girl got up on a bench and did my chin. He almost smiled. I was learning that the almost was as far as 11 years had left him able to go. You looked at the god everyone has spent a decade building, and you saw a man being hanged very slowly. You are the first person, since my father died, who has looked at me and seen something to laugh at, instead of something to fear. Do you understand what that is worth to a man who has been a portrait since he was 12? If you have ever made a lonely person laugh and watched something come back to life in their face that you did not know had died, then you know the tenderness that grew in me those weeks, and you know it is not a thing you can walk away from once it starts. I am going to tell you what Lord Orwyn did when he saw his God King becoming a man again, and why he was not entirely wrong to be afraid, and what it costs to teach someone to be reachable in a world that murders reachable kings. Stay with me to the crowded hall and the fallen mask. The 3 seconds of joy that started all of this nearly ended in the exact grave Orwyn had spent 11 years keeping the king out of. I made him laugh. That was the whole of what I did, and it turned out to be the most dangerous thing anyone had done to the Alpha King in 11 years. Not on purpose, at first. I simply could not help it, and I was too low and too new to have properly learnt the fear everyone else wore around him, and so I treated him, carefully, then less carefully, like a person. I told him when his pronouncements were pompous. I laughed when he said something dry, which startled him every time, as though he had forgotten his own wit could land. I brought him ordinary things, a complaint about the drafty east stair, a piece of gossip from the kitchens, a genuine argument about whether the palace cats should be allowed in the library. And slowly, week by week, the portrait came down off the wall of him. He began to sit down. He began to laugh out loud, a rusty, startling sound that made servants drop things the first few times they heard it. He began, in small, careful ways, to be reachable, to let people near, to be a man his people could love, instead of a god they could only fear. I remember the first time it happened in public, because I thought it might start a war. We were in the great hall at a formal audience, the king on his high seat, the court arranged in its rigid tiers, the whole solemn machinery of majesty grinding through its paces. And some minor lord was delivering an address so pompous, so endless, so in love with its own grandeur, that I, standing at the wall among the servants where I belonged, caught the king's eye by accident, and without thinking lifted my chin, just slightly, to the impossible portrait angle. Our private joke. And the Alpha King of the Iron Reach, in the middle of a state audience, in front of his entire court, laughed. It was not a large laugh. It escaped him, a single startled bark of it, quickly stifled, but the hall heard it, and the hall froze in undisguised horror, because the God King did not laugh. The God King had never laughed, and half the court plainly thought the world was ending. The pompous lord went white, certain he was being mocked. Orwyn's face turned to stone. And Callum, caught, cornered, a king who had not been surprised into a human sound in front of witnesses in 11 years, looked for one panicked instant like a boy caught stealing. And then, with a dignity I found unbearably endearing, simply said, "Forgive me. Continue. It is only that I have remembered I am allowed to enjoy things," and let the audience go on, while the court sat rigid and scandalized and I stood at the wall trying not to weep. Because I had just watched a man reclaim a single inch of himself in public and pay for it in the appalled silence of everyone who had spent a decade needing him to be a statue, and the realm, astonishingly, loved it. That is the thing Orwyn had never counted on. A remote god king is respected, but a king who laughs, who is seen to be human, who can be approached, the pack adored him for it, the way you cannot adore a portrait. The fear that had held the realm at arm's length for 11 years began to turn into something warmer and far stronger. a love that spread through the pack faster than Orwyn could stop it, because it turns out people will die for a king they love, in a way they will never die for a king they merely fear. Lord Orwyn watched his life's work unravel, and was terrified, and I want to be fair to him, because he was not a villain in the ordinary way. He had buried a murdered king, and raised a frightened boy, and spent 11 years keeping that boy alive the only way he knew how, and now a floor girl was undoing all of it, teaching the king to be exactly the reachable, touchable, knife-able man whose reachability had put Callum's father in the ground. To Orwyn, I was not a sweet love story. I was a mortal danger, dressed as a scrub maid, dismantling the one thing standing between his king and an assassin's blade, and he moved against me with the conviction of a man protecting the thing he loves most. He came at me the way a Lord Steward comes at a floor girl, with the full weight of the court. First, he tried to have me removed quietly, reassigned, sent away, the low creature who had gotten above herself and was making a mockery of the crown. When Callum refused, Orwyn did something cleverer and crueler. He made his case in open council, and his case was not that I was unworthy. His case was that I was killing the king. He stood before the council and laid it out with a grief that was entirely genuine, that the Omega had stripped the king of the sacred remove that had protected him since his father's murder, that a reachable king is a dead king, that the whole realm had watched Callum become human and beloved and utterly, fatally approachable, and that when the assassin came, and one always comes, Orwyn said, one came for his father, there would be nothing between the blade and the king but a floor girl who had taught him to lower his guard. She has made you lovable, Orwyn told the king, in front of everyone, and it was the most damning thing he could have said. And lovable men die. I have kept you alive for 11 years by making you a god. She will get you killed in 1 season by making you a man. The terrible thing was that half the council believed him, and the more terrible thing was that I began to fear he was right. Because I loved Callum by then, I will stop pretending otherwise, and Orwyn had put into words the exact thing that woke me at night, that in giving the king back his humanity, I might have handed him to the exact death his whole legend had been built to prevent. I had taught a hunted man to walk in the open. What if the old guardian was right, and the open was where the knife was waiting? And then, because the world has a cruel sense of timing, the knife came. It came at the Harvest Assembly, the most crowded and public day of the year, exactly the kind of occasion the old Callum would have attended as a distant, guarded, untouchable icon on a high dais, and that the new Callum attended as a man, down among his people, reachable, beloved, and exposed. Orwyn had begged him not to. Callum had gone anyway, because he had decided he would rather be a king his people could reach than a portrait they could only fear, and I had encouraged him, and I stood in that crowded hall watching him laugh among his pack with my heart in my throat, praying that Orwyn was wrong. Orwyn was not entirely wrong. That is the thing this story refuses to make simple. A rival pack's agent, an old enemy who had waited 11 years for exactly this, for the God King to become a reachable man, was in that hall. And he came out of the crowd with a blade, straight for the king, who no longer stood behind a wall of untouchable remove. And for one plunging instant it looked as though the murdered father's fate had come for the son, and that Orwyn's warning had been the true one all along, and that I had loved a man to death. That is the fallen mask the cold open promised you. And here is what Orwyn, for all his 11 years of wisdom, had gotten exactly wrong. Because the assassin came out of the crowd, and the crowd stopped him. Not the guards. The guards were a half-second too far, exactly as they had been for Callum's father. It was the pack. It was a blacksmith, and 2 farmwives, and a boy who sold apples, ordinary wolves of the Iron Reach, who a season ago would have stood frozen before a distant god and let the guards handle it, but who now loved the laughing, reachable human king, who had learned their names and sat at their tables. and who threw themselves at the man with the knife without a thought. Because you protect what you love with your own body, in a way you never protect a portrait. The assassin got his blade into a king's hall, and could not get it into the king, because a dozen common wolves who adored Callum were between them before he took his second step. I was one of them. I had crossed the hall the instant I saw the blade, because loving someone teaches your body to move before your mind can vote, and I reached the assassin as the pack bore him down, and his knife, thwarted of the king, came around at the nearest throat, which was mine, and it opened my arm instead of my neck, a bright cold line and a wash of heat, my blood coming down onto the floor of the hall I had once scrubbed. But the king was untouched, surrounded, protected, alive, not by a legend, but by love, by a whole pack that would not let their human king fall. And Lord Orwyn, who had spent 11 years certain that only a god could survive, stood in that hall and watched a reachable, beloved, thoroughly human king be saved by the very reachability he had feared would kill him, and understood, too late and all at once, that he had been protecting the king from the wrong thing. The remove had not been keeping Callum safe. It had been keeping him alone, and alone is exactly how his father had died. Because a king no one is allowed to love is a king no one throws their body in front of. It shook the realm, because it upended the one thing everyone thought they knew. For 11 years the wisdom of the Iron Reach had been that a king's safety lived in his distance, that the throne was protected by fear and remove, and the untouchable legend, and in a single afternoon a floor girl and a harvest crowd proved the opposite, that the safest king is not the one no one can reach, but the one everyone would die to protect. A god in a golden frame can be toppled by one determined blade. A man beloved by his whole pack is guarded by 10,000 bodies who chose him. Lord Orwyn's life's work was not villainy, and he was not given to the law like a traitor, but he was gently, finally relieved of the legend he had spent 11 years building, because the realm had learned it did not need it. The old enemy, who had waited a decade for the mask to drop, discovered that what was underneath it was not a vulnerable man, but a loved one, which is a far harder thing to kill. My arm healed slow and left a long scar, and I find I do not mind it. It is the second best thing I ever earned. The best was a laugh, the first real one in 11 years, startled out of a man who had been a portrait since he was 12, by a floor girl who could not refuse a dare. It is a year now, as I set this down, and I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which the court has decided to find charming, rather than admit it began with me impersonating the king's chin on a bench. The great portrait came down. Callum wanted it burned, but I would not let him, because I have grown fond of the ridiculous thing, and it hangs now in our private rooms, where only we can see it, the Storm Crag god, the impossible chin, the man commanding the weather. And on the days the old remove tries to creep back into him, the days he catches himself becoming a portrait again, I have only to glance at it, and lift my chin to that impossible angle, and he laughs, every time, the real laugh, the one I spent a season teaching him he was allowed to have. In the great gallery where the god used to hang there is a different painting now, a smaller one, of a king sitting down, laughing, entirely failing to command any weather at all, and the realm likes it far better, and so do I. Callum is a warm man now, to the endless adjustment of a court that spent 11 years afraid of him. He walks among his people. He learns their names. He is reachable and beloved, and therefore, as it turns out, safer on his throne than any god ever was on a crag. He still has the old grief in him, the murdered father, the 12-year-old made into a legend, and I do not try to erase it, I only keep making him laugh, because I have learned that the laugh is the thing that keeps the portrait from swallowing him again. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to and always does, and asked what I was setting down. I told him I was writing the story of the day a floor girl laughed at his portrait, and he forgot to have her punished. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as a god's remove, and that I now know is a once lonely man choosing a true word over an easy one. You write the laugh as the beginning, he said. The dare, the bench, the chin, the day you first made me smile. And it was that. But I have let you call it only the beginning of a love story for a year, and it is time I told you what it actually was. He touched the scar on my arm, the way he does. It was the first time in 11 years I was allowed to be killed, Nessa. Do you understand? A portrait cannot die. Because it was never alive. Orwyn made me a portrait so that I could not be killed. And the price was that I could not be alive either. And then a floor girl climbed up on a bench and laughed at the god, and treated the throne like a man, and for 3 seconds I was a person again. Which meant, for the first time since I was 12, I was a person who could be hurt, and loved, and lost. You did not just make me laugh. You made me mortal again, which is the most dangerous and the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me, and it very nearly got me killed, and it is the only reason I have been alive for a single day since. He almost smiled, the real one now, always the real one. So do not write that you began a love story by laughing at my portrait. Write that you looked at a god everyone was too afraid to touch, and you dared to find him funny, and in doing so you gave a dead man back his life, chin and all. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think. Lord Orwyn spent 11 years certain that a reachable king is a dead king. And he was not entirely wrong. A reachable man came within a blade's width of the same grave as his father. In the end, the pack's love saved Callum where the legend would have. But I have wondered, on the long nights, whether I was brave or only lucky, whether teaching a hunted king to lower his guard was wisdom, or a reckless thing that happened to work, because his people loved him faster than his enemies could reach him. So which was it? Did I save Callum by making him human, or did I gamble his life on a crowd, and win by grace rather than by right? Was Orwyn the fool, or was I? Tell me your verdict below. I read every one. And so, he has confessed, does the king. And if you want to stay in the gallery with us a while longer, comment the portrait, and I will tell you next what happened when the realm's other great houses, having watched a god-king become a beloved man and grow stronger for it, began quietly taking down the grand portraits of their own lords, and discovering who could survive being seen. So the next time something powerful is trying very hard to seem important, wherever you are listening from tonight, go ahead and laugh at it. You never know when the god in the golden frame is just a lonely man who has been waiting 11 years for someone brave enough to find him funny. I laughed at a portrait on a dare and gave a dead man back his life, chin and all,